Imagine a single cell in your body that requires like 600,000 microscopic power plants just to survive.
Yeah.
And now imagine being told those power plants are dying and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it.
It's just a devastating place to start. I mean, when patients hear that their cellular machinery is failing and it's framed as this purely static, irreversible decline, there's a profound sense of helplessness.
Right. Completely. And that is the standard line so many women get when they face a diagnosis like diminished ovarian reserve or Dior.
Exactly.
Or even just age-related fertility challenges,
Yeah.
For decades, the refrain has been, well, your eggs are what they are. Okay, let's unpack this, because today we're exploring a fascinating set of clinical excerpts and supporting research from a piece called The Energy Crisis in Your Eggs, published by the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness. And our mission for this deep dive is to really compare how both Western and integrative medicine are tackling egg health.
And we're doing that by focusing on one specific microscopic structure, right?
Right.
The mitochondria.
The powerhouse of the cell.
Exactly, the powerhouse. And I should note right up front, we aren't taking sides between conventional and holistic medicine here. Our goal is strictly to unpack the data from the provided sources and just understand the underlying biology of what's actually happening in the body.
Which completely shifts the narrative, I think, from a bleak diagnosis to a really dynamic, hopeful 90-day window.
Yeah.
But before we get into how to fix the problem, we need to understand why this specific cell, the human egg, or oocyte, is so uniquely demanding.
Well, it's arguably the most remarkable cell we have. Let's put the sheer scale in perspective. A typical cell in your body, say a skin cell, might have a few hundred mitochondria.
Okay.
A heart muscle cell, which obviously never stops beating, has about 5,000.
Wow.
But a human egg contains between 100,000 and 600,000 mitochondria. It has the most of virtually any cell in the entire human body.
600,000 power plants in one single cell. That number is just wild.
It really is.
And they need that many because they're producing ATP, right? Adenosine triphosphate.
Correct. ATP is the universal energy currency of life. Anytime a cell does literally anything, divides, repairs itself, builds a protein, it spends ATP.
Right.
And the egg requires a massive continuous supply of this currency because of the monumental unassisted task it has ahead of it.
Yeah, reading through the sources, the analogy that immediately popped into my head was like a deep space exploration vessel.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Because think about it. When an egg is fertilized in the fallopian tube, it takes roughly 5 to 7 days to reach the uterus.
Right.
During that time, it undergoes explosive cellular division. It goes from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8 up to hundreds of cells. But it doesn't have an umbilical cord yet.
No, it doesn't.
It isn't plugged into a mother's blood supply.
Exactly. It doesn't actually grow in mass during those early divisions. It's just partitioning its original energy over and over.
Right, so it has to pack all of its own fuel, all that ATP, for this massive, totally unassisted journey before it can ever dock at a host station or implant in the uterus.
What's fascinating here is how that biological reality completely changes our understanding of fertility failure.
How so?
Well, if an egg doesn't have enough healthy mitochondria producing sufficient ATP, the consequences cascade, but they don't look like a sudden explosion.
Okay.
The source material notes that when ATP drops, you see poor fertilization rates, arrested embryo development, and early miscarriages. The egg doesn't fail all at once, It fails quietly at the microscopic level of energy production.
Long before a standard ultrasound would spot a problem.
Exactly.
It essentially just runs out of battery in the middle of deep space. No red flashing lights, it just stops.
Yeah, precisely.
Which brings up the obvious question. If the egg is designed by nature to be this ultimate self-sustaining battery pack, why do these power plants fail? What's causing the energy crisis?
So the sources point to several intersecting causes, but the most universal one is simply age. As we get older, the mitochondria accumulate damage to their own DNA.
Okay.
And this is a really important distinction. Unlike the DNA in the nucleus of your cells, mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, lacks efficient repair mechanisms.
Wait, hold on. Why wouldn't the most important energy factory in the cell have a repair system?
It's weird, right?
Yeah, that seems like a pretty massive design flaw.
It's a quirk of evolutionary biology. Mitochondria actually evolved from ancient bacteria billions of years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were engulfed by our cellular ancestors and formed a symbiotic relationship. Because of that ancient bacterial origin, Their DNA is relatively unprotected.
Right.
They don't have the structural proteins guarding it that our nuclear DNA does.
So it's just kind of hanging out there.
It basically sits completely exposed right inside the energy-producing machinery.
Okay, so it's a naked blueprint sitting next to the furnace.
That is a perfect way to put it. As mitochondria generate all that ATP, they also generate exhaust, specifically harmful byproducts called reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
So these ROS are basically like microscopic sparks flying off the machinery.
Yes, and because the mitochondrial DNA has no protective shield and really poor repair systems, those sparks hit the DNA directly, causing mutations.
Ouch.
Over decades, this creates a vicious cycle. The damaged mitochondria become less efficient, meaning they produce less ATP and even more harmful ROS.
Which accelerates the damage.
Exactly. This is exactly why the clinical data shows egg quality declining more steeply in the mid to late 30s. The cumulative damage simply reaches a tipping point.
It's literally rusting from the inside out. But age isn't the only factor, right?
No, not at all.
The sources also mention oxidative stress from our environment, like chronic stress, poor diet, toxins. And then there's diminished ovarian reserve, or DOR. How does that fit in?
DOR is a critical factor independent of age. Women with DOR have a lower than expected number of remaining follicles, usually indicated by low AMH, anti-Müllerian hormone, or high FSH levels on a blood test.
Right, the standard fertility panels.
Exactly. And the research shows that eggs from women with DOR tend to have significantly lower mitochondrial counts and impaired function, regardless of how old the woman is.
Okay, so a 30-year-old with DOR could have the mitochondrial profile of a much older woman.
Unfortunately, yes.
Plus, you have the physical environment of the ovary itself. If there's poor blood flow, the egg isn't getting the oxygen and nutrients it needs to run that assembly line.
Right.
But I have to push back here.
Okay, go for it.
If age and this cumulative evolutionary DNA damage are the biggest factors, and we obviously can't reverse time or unmutate DNA, aren't we just permanently stuck with bad power plants?
This raises an important question, and it's the exact pivot point where the science gets optimistic.
Okay, good.
You're right, we cannot reverse time. We can't fix deeply mutated DNA. But an egg doesn't mature overnight. It takes approximately 90 days for an egg to fully mature inside the ovarian follicle before ovulation.
The 90-day window.
Exactly. That follicular microenvironment is something we can heavily influence. We have a 3-month window to optimize the conditions, clear out the oxidative stress, and provide raw materials so the mitochondria that are still functioning can work at absolute peak capacity.
Okay, so we have a 90-day window. Let's look at how Western medicine attacks this problem, because the strategy here is very much an outside-in approach. We know the mitochondria are struggling, so we flood the system with the exact raw materials they need.
Conventional reproductive endocrinology focuses on supplying highly targeted cofactors and antioxidants. The most heavily evidenced supplement mentioned in the clinical research is coenzyme Q10, or CoQ10, specifically its active form, ubiquinol.
Right, and the sources point out that CoQ10 isn't just some random vitamin. It's a literal physical component of the mitochondrial electron transport chain.
Yes, it is.
I was trying to picture this, and it sounds like a cellular bucket brigade.
That's essentially what it is. The electron transport chain is passing electrons down a line to generate the current that makes ATP.
Okay.
CoQ10 is one of the workers in that bucket brigade.
Okay.
If you don't have enough workers, the whole line slows down and electrons leak out, creating those harmful ROS sparks we talked about.
So supplementing CoQ10 adds more workers to the line, and it acts as an antioxidant shield.
Exactly.
And the data shows that older women taking 200 to 600 milligrams a day, starting 2 to 3 months before an IVF cycle, see improved egg and embryo quality.
And notice how that 2 to 3 month timeline perfectly matches the 90-day maturation window.
Oh, right.
Another major intervention, especially for women with DOR, is DHEA. It's a mild androgen, or male sex hormone, produced by the adrenal glands.
Yeah.
Multiple studies in the provided material show that pre-treating with 25 to 75 milligrams of DHEA a day for 3 to 6 months can improve ovarian response to stimulation and increase the sheer number of eggs retrieved.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. The source mentions melatonin.
Ah, yeah.
When I hear melatonin, I immediately think of jet lag. You know, the gummy you take on a red-eye flight. But the research shows it's actually a potent antioxidant for fertility. How on earth does a sleep hormone help an egg?
It's a brilliant example of how a single molecule has multiple jobs depending on where it is in the body. In the ovary, melatonin actually physically accumulates in the follicular fluid surrounding the egg.
Really?
Yeah. Its primary job there isn't to induce sleep, it's to act as a localized sponge for oxidative damage. Clinical trials show that supplementing melatonin can significantly improve oocyte quality in women undergoing IVF, particularly those with high markers of oxidative stress.
That's wild. And then they also use myo-inositol. The text says it helps with the signal transduction of follicle-stimulating hormone, which sounds incredibly scientific, but what does that actually mean?
Think of the ovary like a radio station. The brain is broadcasting follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, telling the ovary to grow an egg. Signal transduction is essentially the antenna on the ovarian cells picking up that broadcast. If the antenna is broken or distorted, the ovary doesn't respond, no matter how loud the brain yells.
Got it.
Myo-inositol repairs the cellular antenna, making the ovary much more responsive to the brain's signals.
Ah, that makes so much more sense. We also have to touch on the cutting edge stuff. The sources highlight NAD plus precursors, like NMN and NR.
Right.
This is the stuff coming out of David Sinclair's longevity lab at Harvard.
Hmm.
Now, NAD plus is a crucial coenzyme for cellular metabolism, but why do we need precursors? Like, why wouldn't we just take NAD plus directly?
NAD plus as a molecule is simply too large to cross the cell membrane effectively. It just bounces off.
Oh, I see.
So scientists use precursors, smaller building blocks like NMN or NR, that slip easily into the cell and then assemble themselves into NAD plus once inside.
That's clever.
The animal studies from Harvard showed striking, visible improvements in oocyte quality and fertility when supplementing with NMN. Human trials are actively being researched right now.
The sources even mention experimental mitochondrial transfer, literally taking healthy mitochondria from donor cells and putting them into aging eggs.
Yeah, though the text is clear that this is still highly experimental and not clinically approved in most places.
It's important to keep that context, yes. But to synthesize the Western approach, it's all about compensating for the aging process by externally supplying missing components.
Precisely.
So to use a logistics analogy, Western medicine is basically shipping massive piles of premium bricks and raw materials directly to the construction site,
Right.
which is great. But there's a massive physiological bottleneck here. How do we actually force those nutrients out of the bloodstream and into an ovary that might be actively restricting blood flow due to stress?
This is exactly where the integrative approach, specifically acupuncture, enters the picture.
Okay, let's get into that.
And this is where the science gets really elegant. Acupuncture is one of the most rigorously studied complementary therapies in reproductive medicine. We aren't talking about a vague sense of relaxation here.
Right, it's not just a spa day.
Exactly. The sources detail specific, measurable biological pathways connecting acupuncture directly to mitochondrial function.
Yeah, let's break down the mechanics of this, starting with ovarian blood flow. Because you can take all the CoQ10 in the world, but if the blood vessels leading to your ovaries are constricted, it's useless.
Totally useless.
The premium bricks are stuck in traffic miles from the construction site.
Exactly. The text highlights a landmark study by Stuner Victorine. They used transvaginal Doppler ultrasound to physically measure the blood flow in the uterus and ovaries in real time.
Wow, real-time tracking.
Yeah, and they found that electroacupuncture, where a slight electrical current is passed through the needles, actually modulates sympathetic nerve activity.
That's the fight-or-flight nervous system.
Right. When you're stressed, your sympathetic nervous system constricts blood vessels to non-essential organs, including the reproductive system, to save energy for survival.
Which makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint.
Right. But the electroacupuncture physically interrupted that stress pathway, forcing the blood vessels to dilate. The Doppler ultrasound proved that blood flow to the ovaries measurably increased.
Which means more oxygen, more nutrients, and more of that supplemented CoQ10 actually getting delivered straight to the follicle.
Exactly.
But it goes deeper than just delivery, doesn't it? Because I was reading about how the needles themselves are literally flipping biological switches. How does sticking a needle in your leg or abdomen change a cell in your ovary?
It comes down to cellular signaling. When an acupuncturist inserts and gently twists a needle, the connective tissue, or collagen, actually wraps around it.
Like spaghetti on a fork.
Kind of, yeah. And this creates a mechanical stress on the local cells. In response, those cells dump ATP into the extracellular space as a distress signal.
Wait, so the physical twist of the needle releases local ATP?
Yes, and that local ATP binds to nearby nerve endings. It sends a chemical signal shooting up the spinal cord to the brain, cascading through the nervous system. The studies on electroacupuncture show that this exact cascade directly activates something called AMPK.
The text calls AMPK the master energy switch.
It stands for AMP-activated protein kinase. When AMPK is activated, it signals the cell to trigger mitochondrial biogenesis. That means it is telling the cell to literally create brand new mitochondria, and it forces the existing ones to produce ATP more efficiently. It directly counteracts the mitochondrial depletion we see in aging and DOR.
Okay, so going back to our construction site analogy, if Western medicine is shipping the absolute best premium bricks to the site, acupuncture is like hiring a master foreman who clears the traffic jams on the highway, gets the bricks at the site, and actively manages the workers to start building the house.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the contrast between the two paradigms is beautifully complementary. Western medicine is an outside-in approach. It hands the body the building blocks. Acupuncture is an inside-out approach. It changes the physical signaling environment, reducing cortisol, balancing hormones, activating AMPK so the body activates its own internal repair machinery.
It's wild that an ancient practice using thin needles is now being explained by modern molecular biology and Doppler ultrasounds.
It really is.
So the obvious question for you listening is, how do you actually use this information? Both of these paths are trying to solve the exact same energy crisis in the egg. Why aren't more people doing both together?
Historically, there's been a deep divide, silos between conventional and holistic medicine. But as the article from the Berkeley Center points out, the best evidence now strongly supports a multimodal approach.
Utilizing that 90-day window.
Yes. The text advises working with a reproductive endocrinologist who is open to evidence-based supplementation, while simultaneously partnering with a licensed acupuncturist for weekly or bi-weekly sessions leading up to an IVF cycle or conception attempt.
Right.
You are attacking mitochondrial depletion from every single angle.
And to be clear, and the source material is very grounded about this, neither of these approaches is magic.
No, not at all.
If you're listening to this and navigating this incredibly tough journey, these treatments aren't going to turn back the clock 10 years on your biological age overnight.
They work at the margins of biology. They are gently nudging the cellular energy systems in the right direction.
But at the absolute margins of fertility, where a single successful cell division is the difference between a viable embryo and an early miscarriage, those tiny cellular nudges matter enormously.
They really do.
It's the difference between that deep space vessel making it to the next checkpoint or going dark.
That is the crucial takeaway. Fertility, and specifically egg quality, is not a static diagnosis. It's a highly dynamic energy system that can be actively supported and rehabilitated.
It really changes how you look at the human body. We've explored the sheer scale of the energy demands placed on the human egg, how evolutionary quirks and age tear down those microscopic power plants, and how combining targeted outside-in supplements with the inside-out biological signaling of acupuncture can rewrite the script during that vital 90-day window.
It's a testament to how much value there is in synthesizing different fields of medical knowledge rather than keeping them completely separate.
So what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We just spent this whole time talking about how interventions like NMN, CoQ10, and AMPK activating electroacupuncture can visibly regenerate the energy within the human egg, which is objectively the most demanding complex cell in the entire human body. If this exact combination of inside-out and outside-in therapies can reboot the failing power plants in an oovocyte, well, what could this exact same approach mean for treating cellular aging, chronic fatigue, and mitochondrial depletion in the rest of our organs as we get older?
That right there is the absolute frontier of longevity science.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we can get that spaceship safely across the void, maybe the engine isn't as permanently broken as we were told. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.